We're back in the car. We are traveling through Hammerland. We got the convertible top down, which is probably not the best because it is late at night and there are vampires about. Dr. AC of Horror 101 with Dr. AC, Aaron Christensen, how are you doing today? Or this evening, I should
I'm
say, in my
doing well.
fictitious account where we're at night.
I didn't realize we were in a car. I thought we'd be in a carriage, but I'll take the convertible. That sounds good. Or maybe you're just referring to your carriage as a convertible because that's the way you roll.
No, I'm not that cool. But no, I'm very excited to talk about, I would say irrationally excited to talk about what we're going to discuss today. Um, Dracula, Prince of Darkness, a movie that I had to buy because I couldn't find it anywhere to rent or stream.
Hmm.
I don't know if I missed something, but fortunately, Scream Factory put out a really nice Blu-ray some time ago. And first of all, I watched the US version. I don't know, there's a
Okay.
US and a UK version. Do you know which one you watched?
I watched the US version most recently, and
Mhm.
honestly, I couldn't tell you the difference between the two. I haven't sat down and compared notes.
When I put this movie on at 5 o'clock this morning, uh, immediately it popped up US or UK version. I'm like, I was not prepared for this. I just want to watch the movie. So
Right.
I did
I
a
keep
quick. Hmm? Oh,
keep
what?
coming, keep going.
Okay. So I went to my phone and I did a quick Google search. It looks like the main difference is the US is more of a recent video audio restoration, and that there
Oh,
is some kind of, the person I read said there might be 5 minutes of additional footage in one of the versions. I don't know if they specified or if I just hadn't had enough coffee. So I'm like, okay, the US version apparently looks better, so I'll go with that one. And yeah, I was not disappointed. So this is 1966. The previous Dracula movie that we had discussed, The Horror of Dracula, was 1958. And this is a direct sequel to that movie. As we discussed last time, the Hammer films had sort of moved on into other creature features like Frankenstein movies and things like that in the years in between. So this is sort of revisiting this franchise 8 years later with the return of Christopher Lee as Dracula. Um, Tell me about how you first encountered Dracula, Prince of Darkness. In your viewing of these films, did you watch this as a sequel to Horror of Dracula, or did you just kind of pick it up randomly?
um, gosh, that's a great question. I just want to. I mean, there was still. This is kind of like the third in the franchise, as it were. Thanks because of Brides of Dracula,
But
which
that was
was
like the weird one-off, yeah.
and that's yeah, and exactly that's kind of a one-off, and we don't necessarily know where it falls in the timeline if it feeds or after. But anyway, um, I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure I watched it in sequence. I'd seen Horror of Dracula when I was a kid, but I hadn't seen any of the sequels, and so I watched this one probably for the first time in like yeah, I don't know, like 20 years ago. And I watched it on VHS. I actually found VHS in a gas station on a road trip, and I was like, it was an Anchor Bay VHS, and I was like, oh my god, I've never seen this. So I watched it with great delight, and I'm a big fan of this movie. I think I was perhaps poisoned against it at first from reference books that I'd read that were kind of like, oh, it's a pale shadow of the original, and it kind of recycles a lot of the same things. And but like I think just taken on its own, it's a fun Dracula movie, and it does bring Christopher Lee back, and and I actually enjoy Andrew Keir as kind of the Van Helsing stand-in, Father Shandor. So I'm excited to talk about this one as well.
Recycled. I mean, that's the thing is, I don't. Well, first of all, I want to just touch on the fact that you found an Anchor Bay VHS at a gas station. That's pretty
I know.
special. Was it an actual thing for sale, or was this like a ring tape where someone dropped off this cursed video for other people to
You
find?
know, that's a great. I love that idea, but they just had like one of those random racks of VHS, and that happened to be sitting on it. And I was like, oh my gosh, what a strange thing to find in, Pennsylvania or wherever the heck we were.
Well, so yeah, the thing that struck me about this is I know we've talked on Academia Giallo, which viewers can check out on the playlist. It's our other monthly series where we talk about Giallo. We were discussing Black Sunday a couple months ago, and I know Brian Martinez was vehemently against the idea that that was actually Giallo. So I had that in mind watching this movie. This is like a Hammer vampire slasher movie, and I was seeing all these
Oh,
different slasher movie tropes for movies that hadn't come out yet when this was a thing. And I wondered if there was any influence by those future filmmakers, because I saw a lot of Friday the 13th. I saw some Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It was fascinating because I didn't even really think that that melding those two genres was really a thing, but maybe I'm reading too much into it.
I think you must have had your blood colored glasses on, because I'm really curious to hear your connections to Friday the 13th, Texas Chainsaw, etc.
Okay, let's start with this has nothing to do with what I just talked about, but I do have to discuss this opening. Uh,
Yes.
it's it's like previously on Dracula, where they have the climactic battle from Horror of Dracula between Peter Cushing's Van Helsing and Christopher Lee's Dracula, with that great, the giant iron candlesticks made into a cross, and then Dracula unfortunately disintegrating into that cat skeleton, that cat face skeleton. It's presented with these clouds in my coffee smoke apparition borders with a diamond frame within which we're seeing these past scenes, and it looked like something out of the Eye of Sauron or something, and I was like, I've never seen this technique before, and I kind of want every flashback to appear as
Right?
that.
Yeah. I mean, I love the fact that it wasn't just a flashback, that it was I mean, what came to mind is it's kind of like a storytelling, like if you cast your mind back, 8 years, remember when this happened. And I love that kind of swirling effect, because, that is the memory we have. Like, we might not remember all the details. And I love that they kind of throw that in. But I really appreciated the fact that we did get a recap, because it had been 8 years. And, like, this was in the days before home video. And I think it might have played on television at some point, but I can't even say that happened. So, for most people, they had not seen this movie in 8 years, or unless there was a re-release. That's right. There was a re-release of it.
Mm.
So people might have had a chance to catch it on the re-release, but for the most part, this was 8 years ago, and it was a big deal to have Christopher Lee back in the Cape.
Well, it's also, we've talked about a lot of the Frankenstein films that Hammer did, and even though Peter Cushing keeps coming back as Dr. Frankenstein, the continuity between pictures is ever shifting under the character's feet. He's completely
Hmm.
different people from one movie to the next, even though there's supposed to be this tenuous connection. So to see this directly referenced, and not just in a character saying, hey, remember 10 years ago when this happened, we're actually seeing that, yeah, this is legit. You can watch one movie back to back. I also like
Yep.
imagining that this is sort of what Count Dracula is watching from the bowels of hell, or this nether region. Like, he's replaying this his defeat in this kind of smoky mirror realm or something. But once we break out of that, Van Helsing is not in the movie. I was confused as to whether or not I'd missed Peter Cushing's name in the credits or something, because after that he doesn't pop up at all. We are taken to this German countryside. There is a creepy priest, Father Shandor, as you say. I want to say that Shandor
Mm-hmm.
was the name of one of the characters that was referenced in Ghostbusters. If Ivo Shandor or something like that. But he is this guy who walks around the countryside with his rifle, and he's sort of a badass and eccentric, and he hates everybody because they're very superstitious about vampires. And there's garlic everywhere, and he's like kind of waving it away. Um, although it turns out later that he really does believe in this stuff. Uh, we come to an inn where there's a bunch of people drinking and reveling, and there's these like kind of peasanty town folks, and then there's these four, better dressed, well-to-do adults who are visiting from England. They're a couple of brothers, Alan and Charles, and their wives, Helen and Diana. I got the feeling that Alan and Helen were sort of the older of the two because they seemed more mature and they just frankly looked older. They're on this European sightseeing tour, and Father Shandor comes in and is like, "Oh, what are you guys doing?" And they're like, "Oh, we're gonna go to where were they? Oh, Carlsbad." Yeah, and he said, "Don't." And here you go. Um, the priest, and not in so many words, says, "You don't want to go there. It has a death curse." So you've got these people who are going out to this place that the local town legend is that horrible things happened there many years ago and that it's cursed. And these happy-go-lucky, they're not teens, but they're very naive. They're like, that it's superstitious. It's going to be fine. It's on our itinerary. We can't just not go. They end up going, and their first stop is a rundown old shack. Their horse-drawn carriage, much like another film that we talked about. The carriage driver, it breaks down. He actually just refuses to go any further and lets them out, and in this woods, and they go up to the castle. Now, when they arrive at the castle, I should say, the carriage driver leaves, but then another carriage shows up immediately. And I thought maybe as they did that it was their initial carriage driver coming back, but they realized no one's driving this carriage and they're different horses. Right. They get on and the horses don't take them where they want to go. They can't be controlled. They go right up to what turns out to be Castle Dracula. And they go there and there's a place setting for four. Mysteriously, all of their bags have been unloaded from this carriage and put into their rooms. And they meet Clove, this weird butler guy. And from then on, things get really strange, but still maintaining this, what I'll call kind of a slasher film phenomenon. You have the characters getting broken up. You've got these POV shots. Some of them are from the vampire. Some of them I think are from Clove, like following characters down a hall. There's a lot of this kind of slashery motif throughout this film. And I was fascinated by it because it still maintained the flavor of a Hammer vampire film. I've been talking way too much. You say something.
No, I'm fascinated by that. I think it's easy to, because the slasher movement popularized a lot of those techniques and those tropes, I think it's easy to kind of like lump it in. But I mean, if you hearken back to say like 1932's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, there's quite a bit of POV camera use there because they're trying to keep a mystery as to who this person is that we're following. Is it Hyde? Is it Jekyll? We don't know. So that POV, I mean, that's what, just kind of like on a side note, I mean, I was kind of struck by when I saw that 1932 film, I'm like, oh my gosh, like this whole POV thing that gets chalked up to the 70s and the 80s, has roots much further back. And I think, it's nice to see, but those tropes of like, breaking up, I mean, that also goes back to like, Abbott and Costello movies where it's like, you have groups and we got to separate them so that they're, more vulnerable. And so something will encounter, like Costello will notice something, but he's alone so that when his friend comes in, they don't believe him, so I think it's easy to kind of like make it all about the slashers, but I think a lot of what we're seeing is, and perhaps this is something I hadn't thought about, but like the slasher movement is actually a distillation of a lot of these other tropes and kind of like finding a really perfect venue for them. But to your point, the carriage sequences and Father Shandor. So Father Shandor, I love that he kind of plays both sides of the fence in that he dismisses these superstitions and this whole like nonsense about vampires and it's over, and it's like, and then he's like, but don't go to the castle because that's where the vampires are. But I do love Father Shandor, and I hope we talk more about him. That the sequence of the carriage, the riderless carriage, that's directly from Stoker's novel. the idea of, like it takes Jonathan Harker to Castle Dracula, and it's driven by no one, and that's something that Harker's like, what? How did this happen? And then his bags are up, brought up mysteriously. I don't know if you remember, but Clove will appear again in Scars of Dracula. That is his same. That's the same servant, and it's the same role. However, it's played by a different actor Troughton, and he has gone through some serious hygiene issues in that, this Clove is very clean and upright, and the Clove we meet in Scars of Dracula is kind of like a Renfield type. He's dirty and he's shuffling and very emotional.
Well, that makes sense that they have that portrayal in this film, because we already have a Renfield who shows up later, complete with eating the bugs. But it's funny that you mentioned this, because the lineage of the slasher film back to earlier movies that I frankly have not seen, but hopefully we'll fix that over the course of several discussions with you and like-minded folks. But no, I'm reading a book right now called Words on the Move by John McWhorter, and it's about language and the evolution of language, and how modern terms that we are very annoyed by, like the use of like and very and these kinds of nonsensical fill-in words, they actually date back much earlier than anybody thought. We consider it to be, it's ever since the 90s people don't know how to talk, and no, it goes back to like the 1890s in a lot of cases. It's very fascinating. But no, I wonder if I would have picked up on that, much like you did, watching, different movies, and then discovering Jekyll and Hyde and seeing that those tropes, that's where they originate from. I wonder if I would have had that same notion. Watching this film in particular, I mentioned Texas Chainsaw Massacre. There's a scene where Alan discovers the body of Helen, who is eventually turned into a vampiress, but her body has been stuffed into a trunk, and he discovers that, and he sees the hand hang out the side, and I immediately thought of, I don't remember who it was, but it was one of the hippies in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, when the guy opened up the freezer and you see her body kind of like flopping out. She didn't flop out, but it was the arm hanging out. Just reminded me of that freezer shot.
Right.
But there's something going on in this movie, and I can't quite put my finger on it, but it is just so wonderful and inventive that when you say that you had read criticism of it, that it was sort of the same old thing, I'm puzzled by it, because we go to a monastery where Father Shandor, lives, and we've got Clove driving Dracula and the Helen vampiress in a horse-drawn carriage up and just kind of parking outside. And then you have this assault on the monastery. I've never seen that before. Have you?
No, no, I don't think I have. I think I think people got, because the Alan character is, or the Charles character, the Francis Matthews character, the younger one, he is kind of a stand-in for Michael Gough's Arthur character. They have a similar trajectory in terms of their wife being captured and being nearly vampirized. So there are some parallels. What's interesting is looking back, because Horror of Dracula, Sangster was doing a great job of kind of distilling Bram Stoker's Dracula, his novel, down. And what this does is kind of introduce some of those bits and pieces that weren't able to be put into the original. The riderless carriage we just talked about, like the Barbara Shelley's, appearance as a vampire. Like they're just the nighttime ride back to Castle Dracula, with Shandor and Charles in pursuit. There's a lot of Renfield. The Renfield character is not in Horror of Dracula, so it's like they found just like lots of opportunities to get a little bit more Stoker into Dracula, Prince of Darkness, and I think I appreciated that more this time than on previous viewings.
Yeah, and there was that it's sort of the opening up of this world. It doesn't just take place in the castle and, you know, the various catacombs beneath or whatever. It actually has a couple of different locations. Like it becomes like almost like a low-key siege movie in the last half hour when they get to the monastery. The one thing I want to discuss before we blow right past it is Helen. She is
Mm-hmm.
she's kind of the worrywart character that we see in a lot of these kind of horror movies, but there is something particularly tragic because she got a bad feeling about making this trip, going to this castle. She kept urging her friends to leave and they just wouldn't listen. And she gets turned into a vampire. And then later on in the monastery, they have to put a stake through her heart. She never became the ghoul to me. I always saw her, and maybe this is what they were trying to get across because they mentioned that it is the shell of Helen, but there's something evil inside of her. I kept thinking, I kept seeing her face, her character, and she's so sad and tragic that if they had just listened, they all would have gotten out alive. We've seen this in other films, but the actress, what is her name?
Barbara Shelley.
Barbara Shelley. Okay.
Barbara Shelley.
All right. She's just great. She's kind of cold and aloof in the beginning, but then it takes on this tremendous sympathy, and she's also kind of creepy when she's showing up at the door trying to get into Diana's room in the monastery. There's just the full range. This movie has a lot of you know, gives a lot of, I think, agency to the female characters. We've seen some of that in these other movies, and some we just don't see it at all, particularly in the end. I'm jumping around here, but when Diana and Father Shandor at the end are watching Charles and Count Dracula wrestle on the ice, and the priest is like, I don't know what to do. The gun won't work. And she's like, I'll see about that. She grabs it and just like starts shooting at the ice. And then she leads to the solution, which I need to ask you about. But I was just very surprised. I'm like, this is the 1960s. This is pretty badass. This is she's like up there with Ellen Ripley now for me.
Well, I mean, yes, and I liked the idea of that. I will say that they do make Diana a bad shot. You know, she's aiming for. I don't think she's aiming for the ice. I think that's kind of like they go, and you know, the fact that she happens to hit the ice and that, you know, unlocks it for Father Shandor. That's cool. And I mean, but going back to Barbara Shelley is one of my favorite Hammer actresses. She also has a terrific performance in Quatermass in the Pit, which I can't remember. Did we talk about that one?
No.
Did we talked about that one? Okay. It's one of my favorite of the Quatermass movies, and she's just fantastic in that because, as she does in this movie, she really shows a really amazing range. She is shown as prim and proper at the beginning, and then after she's vampirized, there's kind of like an unleashing of her ego, you know, her id rather, where she's very, you know, like alive and sexual, and, you know, to the point where she's putting the moves on her sister, and, you know, like that's or her sister-in-law, I guess. They're not blood relatives. The two brothers are.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, but I mean, I love, and then the fact that, you know, like, as you said, you know, by the end, she's just this snarling caged creature, you know, being held down by a bunch of men. It's like, this is, you know, kind of transgressive here. So I think there's a lot, you know, I think Barbara Shelley's presence in this film elevates it at least 2 or 3 notches. It's just it's a terrific performance, and it's a terrific character.
Yeah, and I just want to stand up for Diana and her lack of being a good shot. She was watching her husband be attacked by an undead creature on the ice, which is also doubly strange. And I get the feeling that she grabbed that gun, but I don't know how often she had fired it. So I don't know what kind of shot she's supposed to be.
Well, exactly. I was like going, I mean, good on her for taking any kind of initiative at all.
But she could have easily just shot Charles instead.
Right. Like maybe she would, just as well. She wasn't a better shot.
Now we learn a bit about some of the vampire lore and rules in this particular film, the one of which comes in very handy during that ice scene, but I don't think I had heard of it in this context. I always thought the kind of allergic to running water was sort of a headless horseman trope because you can't cross the bridge or something like that. I might be getting it. Has that always been part of vampire lore? They like running water kills them?
I don't know that. It's kind of what I originally understood it, and I've since kind of taken it on as like, okay, well, that works too. But the idea is that they can't cross running water because they have an aversion to it. Until this movie, I didn't know it could kill them. But I believe that it's in Stoker's novel that Van Helsing explains that they can't cross running water.
Do you know why that is? Like, what is the significance of that part of the mythology?
Don't recall.
Hmm.
I didn't know there was going to be a quiz.
I keep throwing you under these buses. Last time I wanted you to give the synopsis, and now, but no, actually, in October I want to talk about the original Dracula, possibly for Scarathon, and I may actually make that into a page to screen where I read the book too, because I've never read the novel. I think I've read bits of it here and there, but never sat down and committed to it. So I'll be very curious about that.
I'm a huge fan of it. I think the novel is it's a really fun read. You can also see why there hasn't been a straight adaptation of it. But I really like the novel for what it is. I think it's a really great literary exercise, and it would be interesting for someone to attempt to do a straight adaptation of it as written.
So how? I saw Bram Stoker's Dracula from Francis Ford Coppola, 30 years ago. How close was that? Because I heard people say, "Oh, this is an adaptation of the book." I don't know if that's true or not.
It's got parts of it. Yeah, no, it's not a faithful adaptation. Let's say that.
Okay, let's talk about the man of the hour, Count Dracula.
Sure.
Does Christopher Lee say anything in this movie?
He does not. I'm so glad you brought that up. There's been much writ and spoke about his lack of dialogue in the movie. Christopher Lee went on record saying that the dialogue was so terrible that he refused to utter a line of it. Screenwriter Jimmy Sangster has said, "That's great, Chris, but there was actually no dialogue ever written." So nice comment. I mean, and in some ways, it again mirrors the Stoker novel, because the original film, Horror of Dracula, is where we meet Dracula and we kind of get his background, and he's very polite and an upstanding member of society, and then he turns into a beast, or is revealed to be a beast. Well, having already had that revelation, there's really no need for him to go back to that would be a retread if he went back to a state of being this refined nobleman trying to lure them in. So the fact that he's a beast throughout, I find perfectly in keeping, and it doesn't bother me at all. I like the ferocity that Lee brings to the part. So I wasn't missing. I can't. What you'll find in the subsequent sequels is that he does have a few things to say, and you wish that he wasn't saying them at all. Like the dialogue that he is given later. That's also why I kind of like go, really, Chris? Because the dialogue he has, say for "Taste the Blood of Dracula" and "Dracula's Risen from the Grave," not to it's not Shakespeare. Let's put it that way. And so the fact that he would speak that dialogue but not this dialogue feels a little suspect.
And there is, a moment where Dracula is seducing Diana in the monastery, and he opens up his shirt and he slices down the middle, and he starts bleeding so that she can drink it. Very interesting camera angle for most of that too. It looks like she's getting ready to do something else, which I'm sure was accidental.
I'm sure.
But he doesn't say that. I kept waiting for him to say something in terms of seduction, but it's not seduction, it's submission, because he draws her in with that vampire stare, and then he does the just the flick of the wrist down, to point to get her to kneel or whatever. It was very, very powerful stuff. I think I would probably have to watch Horror of Dracula and this, kind of back to back, like within the same night, because I get what you're saying, because he was the man in the previous film, and now he's just this thing that's been unleashed. I kept thinking maybe it's that he needs to build himself up more to kind of reclaim that humanity, because he's been down in hell and now he's just back as this bloodthirsty beast. Maybe he needs to be re-socialized. But it's just, my only complaint is when he dies and he slips under the ice, he's got the weirdest death screams, like, oh, I'm like, I don't know what that was. That couldn't have been Christopher Lee.
You're right. You're right. I want to offer a little correction. When he does make that gesture, that's actually the gesture he makes for her to take the cross off.
Oh, okay.
He actually doesn't make a gesture. He reaches out and takes her by the shoulders and draws her to him in a very suggestive way. So yes, the same spirit of it, in that I think it is absolutely intended to be a double entendre or a visual pun. But yeah, the gesture itself is for, which I found also, again, I've not seen that where you don't usually, you see a vampire kind of shying away from the side of the cross. He sees the cross, he averts his eyes to hers and just tells her to take it off. And I'm like, interesting, like he has that kind of power.
Well, we're going to talk about those powers and the power of iconography next, because as much as I love this movie, I feel like it was kind of all over the place as far as the rules. The running water is one thing. I'll accept that, because the best mythology movies, I think, are the ones that take mythology that you've known for decades and they add a new wrinkle. Like I'm going to bring up Twilight. They're like, no, sun doesn't actually kill us. It just makes us sparkle. I mean, like, that's ridiculous, but it's interesting.
Sure.
But so here, in one instance, I think it's the same scene where we reveal that Helen has come back as a vampire, and then Dracula intervenes. This is in the castle, and Charles and Diana are both the. Oh my God! I just realized that these characters are named Charles and Diana.
I'm glad that the light bulb went on.
I'm just gonna get stuck on that, because now I'm imagining the actual Charles and Diana fighting vampires in Germany.
Right? Who wouldn't watch that?
Well, I mean, we don't need to talk anymore about Carriages Out of Control, but I will say that the scene where they confront their two vampire attackers is very cool, because Helen Vampirus brushes up against Diana, and she, just because Diana's wearing the cross on her, the crucifix, it just brushes Diana's arm, and then you see the imprint. Like, I've never seen that before. Usually it's more deliberate, like you're coming at a vampire and it leaves a mark on their head or something.
Right.
This is just like, wow, they really are sensitive to this stuff. And then Charles, I think, grabs the sword and he does kind of a revision of the candlestick thing with two other pieces of metal, and they back their way out of the castle, and there's a horse-drawn carriage. Okay, couple of things. In that scene, Dracula was repulsed by the cross. So a day later, when he's in the monastery and he's faced with a crucifix, how is he standing there just like, take that off, instead of like, can you please take that off?
Well, and also just the fact, I mean, the fact that you just brought, like, the fact that he's able to enter a monastery is pretty impressive.
That's the next question. So do you have an answer for the first one?
I don't have an answer for why I mean, maybe it's smaller and there's, if we hark back to Fright Night, you have to have faith, I don't know. Like the fact that she was, I have no idea. I can't say why he was able to but I think also he doesn't avert his, as I said, he doesn't look at the crucifix. He brings his eyes up to hers, so he's not technically looking at it.
So he has no peripheral. He has no peripheral vision, right? But
no peripheral vision.
Let's talk about that monastery, because Father Shandor says the famous vampire cliche: as long as no one who lives in this residence invites the vampire in, everyone's going to be fine. But if that happens, he says something like, no amount of garlic is going to protect us,
Right.
which is very interesting because that seems to work. Uh, because Dracula is able to come into the monastery. And I think that's what freaked me out is there is that crucifix that she's wearing. So are all of his powers rendered obsolete if he's invited into a place? And if so, how did those crosses and things have an effect on him in his own home of Castle Dracula?
A good question, sir. I don't have an answer.
Maybe it doesn't count if it's your own place, you're vulnerable. I don't know, but it's just,
I'll also say I've never actually thought of that before, and this is probably like the fifth time I've seen it. Like that has never occurred to me that. But I also, I mean, I don't feel like he has. I don't feel like he has a ton of vulnerability in the in. I don't feel like he has more vulnerability in the monastery or Castle Dracula. I feel like it feels relatively consistent. Am I wrong?
well, just in the sense that, I mean, if what we're talking about is the idea of, what are the literally the house rules, like if you're a vampire and you're in your own castle, if you can go into someone else's house or even a monastery if you're invited in and have a lot of the other powers rendered, weaker or altogether useless, as Father Shandor seems to imply, if you're in your own house, your own castle, and someone else waltzes in with a crucifix, why are those people allowed to back out, waving crosses and escape instead of just, you're in my house, that stuff doesn't work on me here?
Well, wait. I mean, but in the monastery, I mean, what Father Shandor says is that if someone invites him in, he has his full powers, right?
Right.
Yeah,
So yes, that's my question. If you can be invited into a place and have your full
right.
powers, why doesn't that work in a place that you own if you're the vampire?
Well, but he does have his own power. He does have his powers.
But I'm saying
I,
in that scene, in that the scene that we referenced where Diana and Charles escape,
yes,
Dracula and Helen are both repulsed by the crucifix, and that because there's like
it's
two
a big
crucifixes.
crucifix. It's a big one.
But if they have all their powers, it shouldn't matter if it's the size of the castle itself.
Well, but no, I mean, but I feel like it's the vampire is repulsed by the crucifix regardless. I mean, he couldn't. I think they make that clear in his seduction of Diana, in that he has her take it off.
So he has
Like
to actually
it
lock
does
eyes.
represent.
He can't be looking
That's
at
what I'm
the
thinking. He has
crucifix
to be.
directly. Okay.
Yeah, but I feel like I mean, he instructs her to take it off because he can't do what he wants to do while she's wearing it. I feel like that still is playing by the rules there. I mean, yes, it's a little like, I mean, yes, he does use his soft focus, but I feel like that he has her take it off for a reason. He doesn't just plow past it.
I just got an idea
You
for a
agree?
movie. Well, I don't know, but I just got an idea for another movie here. Because if the whole thing is like the vampire can't see the holy object, would it make sense for a vampire to blind itself?
I mean, it would be, I think, problematic for them. I mean, we do see that. We see that in other vampire movies. We'll have the vampire, like, hide himself from the cross. He can't stand the sight of it. I think it is about vision.
Hmm. Because I'm thinking, yeah, it'd be problematic for a number of reasons, but like, what if you wanted to be the most effective vampire? So you come back
Yeah.
from the dead and you blind yourself, or just even just like do like the old Daredevil mask where you kind of tie the thing around your eyes so you can go, because you have heightened senses of strength and smell and taste and all this other stuff.
Sure.
If the whole now then
If
it
you can't,
becomes, what can you smell a crucifix? Can you smell the blessing?
yeah, probably not. Probably not. But you would want to make sure you didn't accidentally, stumble into some running water.
I feel like you could sense it. Like you could hear it's like Superman. You can hear the rumble, the waves.
Sure. Sure, sure. Okay.
This is not
I
the movie we're
mean,
talking about, though. I
no, it's
apologize.
not. But I mean, like they have blind samurai movies, so why not have a blind vampire movie?
A blind
I mean, there are the
samurai
blind
vampire.
dead.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen Tombs of the Blind Dead, the Spanish um, writing Templar undead movies, the blind dead movies?
I've never seen it, but I've heard it. No, I'm just kidding.
You love them.
No.
Okay, so yeah, so they have. I mean, you think? I mean, that's the thing. Like they are blind and they move really slowly and they still get their victims. So figure that one out.
Wow. Um, I can't unpack that right now. So there, we've already kind of talked about the ending here. Um, Dracula gets pulled under the water with the lamest death scream ever. And we see him pop up. We see him, underneath the ice, and it's cool. He's got like the white eyes and he's, kind of decaying. Uh, is there a direct sequel to this movie?
Where does he pop up in Dracula's Risen from the Grave? I don't recall. I don't recall what his origin is. But I think it's worth not to deflect,
Hmm.
but I think it's worth going. If we think about the fact that 10 years have passed between Horror of Dracula and Dracula Prince of Darkness, what was Clove doing all this time? Why was he just like hanging on to the ashes for 10 years? I mean, if I was Dracula, I would have like been like, buddy, it's been 10 years. What were you waiting for? I've been sitting in this urn for like 10 years. It is, and also, like what you see at the end of, you've seen the Flash Gordon from 1980?
No,
Okay,
it's
well,
a blind spot. I
there's
gotta fix that.
the end of Horror of Dracula has the ring and the dust kind of blowing away, and that is echoed for the end of Flash Gordon with Ming the Merciless. But if we do see the dust being blown away, it's like, was Clove like standing there with a dustpan, like to catch it really quick after Van Helsing walked out? It's like if the dust is blowing around, he must have been in there for a while, like kind of sweeping up all the dust of Dracula and collecting it so that he could, have it for later. And also, how did Clove even know that, I mean, where was Clove? I mean, we didn't see him in Horror of Dracula. Like, where did this manservant pop up from? These are the things that keep me up at night.
Well, first of all, I don't think there were any windows open during that Van Helsing Dracula fight, so it's entirely possible. Well, which brings to mind the question: where
Where,
did the
where,
wind come from?
where was the wind coming from? Right.
Unless it's like the satanic heavenly wind of like blowing the creature has been sent back to hell. But if the
The
windows
wind's
aren't open,
huge.
Clove has 10 years. He could be dusting that place. I mean, we see him adding the dust to the crypt, which I think was one of the cooler sequences where Alan gets
Love
up in the
that
middle of the night.
transformation.
Yeah, finds Clove bringing something downstairs. So he goes to tell Helen, yeah, Clove's doing something. I'm gonna go follow him. She's like, don't go. And of course, because everybody ignores Helen in this movie to their detriment, he's like, I'll be back. Go back to sleep. He goes down to the basement, finds this cool looking crypt, and is stabbed in the back, which reminded me of Friday the 13th, Part 2. The deputy sheriff is following Jason through the woods. He discovers the shack. He sees something that he can't comprehend and yet is kind of horrifying to him. And all of a sudden, claw hammer right in the back of the head. And he ends up as part of the scenery. I'm reading way too much into this, but
You've
another
just seen a lot of Friday the 13th, is what it is.
I have. And it's followed up with another Friday the 13th reference from part two. Clove strings up the guy. So he's hanging upside down and then unceremoniously slits his throat. And, the gore pours down into the crypt, which has been freshly sprinkled with Dracula's ashes. And then we see an effect that I've seen a couple other places, but the first time I remember it was the Rennie Harlan Nightmare on Elm Street 4, where Freddy is resurrected in the junkyard and he comes like literally from dust to bone to vein to skin to his full like burnt crispiness. But here it's even more impressive because this is 20 years before that. They get away with it pretty well. It's only towards the latter half of the transformation where they're like, okay, this is getting a little too complicated. We're just going to cover it up with smoke.
Right, right. But yeah, I love that whole sequence, and I think it's worth noting, like, there's a lot of blood, like it's pretty gory, and I don't know that we had seen anything like that. This felt like Hammer pushing the envelope. The only things comparable was like the H.G. Lewis movies at the time that had come out in '64 with Blood Feast and 2000 Maniacs, but those were not taking themselves seriously.
Mm.
Those were kind of jokey and gore for gore's sake, and it was meant to be, shocking and yet funny at the same time. Whereas this is taking it very seriously. There's a lot of atmosphere going into the setup, and I can imagine audiences in 1966, watching poor Alan being, strung up, and then having his throat slashed and just blood pouring down, and then Dracula appearing naked, by the way. I think perhaps the first time we've seen a vampire come back naked from the grave, because usually he just appears in his evening clothes, whenever they resurrect him. And I think that is the case for the rest of the Hammer movies, is whenever Dracula comes back, he's all ready for dinner. But
Now,
yeah, I was like, I think, like, I can only imagine, like, audiences in 1966, like, just how impressive that sequence must have been.
it's impressive today, because especially realize it was all done, practically, and a lot of stuff in camera, and you can see very clearly what's going on. It's very convincing. It doesn't look hokey the same way that, say, when you saw Frankenstein frozen in ice last month, but it's just, a guy wrapped up in cellophane made to look like ice. They're really going for it here. Um, back to your point of, what was Clove doing first. I love the idea that I think there should be a movie called The Dust of Dracula. It's just
Yes.
maybe it's a short of him collecting the pieces over, because he's got 10 years, as I mentioned. But yeah, since he wasn't referenced, maybe he was, maybe Castle Dracula is just a big place, and he was just, just because we didn't know about him doesn't mean that there wasn't a whole, like, lifelong relationship going on that we just weren't privy to until this one. I didn't even question it because I kind of forgot that he wasn't in the other movie.
Right. And I think that's right. I think that, like, just because we didn't see him doesn't feel like it's changing the rules. It just feels like it's a little convenient that he happened to be, hanging around the corner after Van Helsing did his number on Dracula. But I'm not gonna. It doesn't ruin the enjoyment of the movie for me at all. It's just something you think about on the way home, where you're like, now wait a minute, wait, what? Again, like, what? How was he there to clean up the mess, and then why did he wait 10 years to lure somebody else in?
Well, I think I have an answer to the second one, which is that the Legend of Dracula, much like the Legend of Camp Blood, after it, I was going to say before it, but much long after, kept people away. So it they had done such a great job of the legend quarantining Castle Dracula that he didn't have an
There you
opportunity.
go.
And I don't see Clove as the kind of guy who is going to venture out to a surrounding village to kidnap someone and drag them back. He just doesn't seem like that strong-willed a person. I mean, he can sneak up on someone and stab them, to death. But I don't see him as like the skilled kidnapper sneaking around, getting someone into a carriage and driving them back. He's good at carting dead people around or undead people, but that's about it. He's a great chauffeur, not so much a hitman.
Well, I don't know. I mean, he does do a pretty good job of knifing Alan in the back, and doesn't he sneak up behind Charles when they're backing out?
Yes, but then again, it's sneaking. I mean,
He's
I don't
okay.
know. I don't know what these villages are like, but I can imagine, unless if he's gonna break into someone's home and take a damsel out of her bed, even that involves a lot of screaming and possibly being found out. He's fine being Mr. Belvedere, just waiting for that call, like, oh, the horses are aroused. Now, I do want to ask about the horses, um, because when Charles and Diana, I can't stop thinking about that. When they back out of the castle, there are horses waiting for them and they jump on and they go away to where they want to go. I think they go right to the monastery. Where do those horses come from? Those aren't Dracula's horses, are they? Are those random horses?
I
Because
don't. They're just random horses, which is the name of my new album.
I just, if they are Dracula's horses, I don't know why they wouldn't just sit there and be like, what, we're here. This is where we're supposed to go.
Right, right. What, yeah, why didn't they, I mean, they fight Charles pretty hard in terms of when he's trying to steer them, the fact that they just go, nope, whatever, we're going to home, we're going to Castle Dracula. So yeah, I hadn't thought about that before. The fact that they, where did these convenient horses pop in?
I like Convenient Horses better as a band name. But yeah, I think it's weird because talking through this movie, we're nitpicking it to death, but watching it, and maybe it's because I watched it at 5 o'clock in the morning, I had no problems with it. There are little
Oh,
things that I thought about that kind of blew up after I'd seen it, but I think this is possibly my favorite Hammer film that we've watched so far, at least in terms of the
hmm.
vampire ones. And that's saying something because I was pretty in love with what Cushing brought to Horror of Dracula, but I didn't miss him in this movie, possibly because I saw him for like 2 minutes in
Oh,
the opening.
well, and I think also, I mean, that's a great, I'd love to talk about Andrew Keir, because I think Father Shandor is a terrific character. And it's not a Van Helsing stand. I mean, it's a Van Helsing stand-in, but it's not someone being Van Helsing without being called Van Helsing. Like, he's a very different character. And I love that, like he doesn't suffer fools lightly. He's not, he's clearly a force for good, but whereas Van Helsing's is, say, a razor, he's a club.
Hmm.
And I just love watching. He really owns the screen, Keir does, and in a different way than Cushing.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. They're two. Now, could we get? I don't think we're going to see this because you probably would have told me by now. But could we get a Van Helsing Shandor team up movie?
I'd sign up for that. No,
Well,
this is sadly the only time we will see Father Shandor. He does not appear in the next two, and then Van Helsing is back for AD 1972.
mm, well, we shall miss you, Father Shandor, wherever you are. It's not to say he couldn't be resurrected for a current movie because I just wanted to see a movie about vampires raiding a monastery. Or are there any good movies about vampires attacking churches?
I've never seen one. I come honestly, it's so funny you say that, because I've seen this movie several times. It never struck me as odd that here they are coming up against a monastery. It's like you would think they would be, even invited in. You would think that this is not a good place for them to be.
Because I think that movie could open up, you could get really into like whatever mythology it wanted to say. Like, here's the reason that crosses and
Right,
everything work, unless you violate this one rule. Here's the context
right,
of it. But yeah, I think
yeah.
anyone watching this out there who's a burgeoning screenwriter, write the vampires attack a monastery or vampires attack a church movie. It could be like From
And then
Dusk
bring
Till
Father
Dawn, but
Shandor in.
religious. Yeah. Yes. Have Father Shandor. That's a must.
Yeah.
But
It's
thank
also
you.
worth pointing out, in case people are asking, like, why are we saying Father Shandor when the end credits say Sandor? It's Father Sandor in the end credits, and that's because that is how its name is pronounced throughout the movie, and that is how it was actually supposedly in the script. So why the end credits read Sandor, we don't know. There was some for the commentary track, they were kind of making some guesses that it's possible that it was just mistyped for the end titles, but that because of the cost, because they were trying to do things on the cheap, and they probably said nobody's going to notice this, and that's perhaps how it happened. But yeah, he's pronounced Father Shandor. It was written Father Shandor in the script, and for some reason in the end titles they left out the H.
Well, it's also Germany in the 1800s or whatever. They just pronounce things differently. Yeah, it's like, it's an accent. No, well, I'm glad that we got to talk about this. I'm glad I got to watch this because I wasn't quite sure what to expect, because we've had some pretty high bars with these movies. My fear is that as we get further along, is kind of, you alluded to, the hits and misses, they sort of start catching up with each other in terms of quality. But this is definitely, as I mentioned, one of my high ranking ones. So yeah, this is very cool.
Great.
Thank you. And
Yeah,
we'll be back
I
next
feel
month.
like, sorry, I feel like, like from here on out, there are highs and lows within the movie
Mm.
for the next four. the next 4 Dracula movies is that, like, I don't know we're going to have this kind of universal, pardon the expression, excellence throughout. I think that it's easier to nitpick and on a more fundamental level. Like, there are some flaws where you're like, oh shoot, that takes this down a peg.
Well, I guess my expectations are now leveled, so I guess thank you.
You're welcome.
But okay, so we're going to leave it here, and we'll be back next month. And in the interim, we'll probably be talking about Academia Giallo, which we still have to figure out what the next class is going to be. But until then, Aaron Christensen of Horror 101 with Dr. AC, thank you so much. Folks out there watching this or listening later, please, check out Aaron's stuff. There'll be a link down in the description. If you like this show, be sure and like and subscribe to the channel. I gotta say, there's something about these horror series, and I don't want to jinx this, but these horror shows that we do are our highest watched videos of anything I do at Kicking the Seat.
Hooray!
Yeah. So, but
I hope you don't jinx us, and thanks everybody for tuning in.
Yes, indeed. So thank you, sir. I'll catch you later, and yeah, take care until next month.
Thanks a lot.
Goodbye.